Welcome, wrestling fans, to the Pro Wrestle Machine. Let's jump right into it. September 18, 2000 Wrestling Observer Newsletter, Raw/Nitro Ratings War, Njpw vs. Ajpw, more. By Dave Meltzer. In what was the most significant and closest Monday night ratings race so far this year, a heavily criticized edition of Nitro on September 11 scored the highest rating for the show in its regular opposed format since Jan. 10th and the closest margin between the two shows since December 20th. Nitro finished with a 3.20 rating, 3.47 first hour, 2.93 second hour, and a 4.8 share. Raw did a 5.90 rating, 5.36 first hour, 6.38 second hour, and an 8.9 share. Whether it was the return of Ric Flair, the wedding angle, the WWF being hurt badly by preemptions the past 2 weeks, or an overall positive trend for the company, doing a number like that, particularly with football competition thrown in, was from a pure ratings standpoint the most impressive number the company has done all year. What was ironic is that it came on the same night where in Charlotte, all those same factors drew 1,657 paid, most of whom purchased tickets in the past week when it was clear Flair would return for the show. And even with that announced, that number for Flair's return is Charlotte speaks volumes. It makes next week's numbers very interesting, because if it is Flair, or the WWF being hurt by being preempted 2 straight weeks, the numbers shouldn't hold up. If the numbers do, it's even more impressive for WCW because the show got a largely horrible response, and Raw was a better than average Raw, and it would be the first period the show did back-to-back 3s opposed since January. This makes things interesting as this goes into uncharted waters with WWF expected to debut in 2 weeks on TNN, a far lower-rated network, in 2 weeks, pending the long-awaited Delaware Court of Appeals judges ruling in the USA Network's lawsuit to keep its WWF programming. If the judges waited to take these numbers into consideration, and the preemptions were probably the most pertinent point in USA losing the first trial, WWF may have gotten the answer it wanted with the closer race. But it also may simply be that Nitro was bolstered by the return of Ric Flair and wedding hype, and Raw was hurt badly by the MNF game between the New York Jets against the New England Patriots, home teams in 2 of the WWF's most populous and historically strongest TV markets. The key argument by the WWF that USA Network didn't match the Viacom offer for the specific programming is that USA failed to guarantee the shows, and Raw in particular being the key show would never be preempted, which Viacom did. The WWF claimed the preemptions for the dog show in February and the 2 weeks at this time of the year for the US Open were a serious factor in losing ratings momentum. Even before there was a Nitro and in the early years of Nitro, it did traditionally take down WWF ratings after the 2 weeks of the US Open. Whether that was due to preemptions or due to football season starting at the same time is something that was never clear because that didn't hold true in February. Traditionally, the WWF in the mid-90s would have 2 bad weeks after the US Open and slowly build back to normal football season levels. On Jan 10th, when Nitro did its season-high opposed 3.38 rating, Raw did a 6.56, so without football, the overall wrestling viewing audience was much higher. Still, the total viewing audience at 9.8 million is better than most weeks of late that didn't have football competition. Nitro's first hour, which doesn't have football opposition, was about a half point higher than the show was doing 1 month ago. Again, all the one-shot factors between the wedding and Ric Flair could play a part in this. The show grew in the first hour to an usually high 4.10 quarter for Jarrett vs. Ms. Jones and the Duggan retirement. The first head-to-head quarter was most significant because Raw had Foley, Rock, Benoit and finally Kane out. Undertaker came as the second quarter started, and opened the show talking about Austin, which drew a 5.06, which can't be labeled as anything but a huge disappointment given the star power. Nitro did a 3.16 for the continuation of the Duggan angle, the Storm vs. Rection match, and the beginning of the wedding, a lot of which can be attributable to Ric's return, which would be expected to do a huge quarter, and even now, I'm not sure 3.16 should make people do cartwheels for a Flair return quarter. Flair's actual return quarter hit a 3.17, and when Flair was taken out after the mock arrest, you could see the life of the live crowd, which wasn't much to begin with, totally taken out with chants of bullshit that lasted more than 5 minutes in the building. Some would argue it was heat, but I'm guessing it's the heat that leads to people not buying tickets the next time in. However, the second wedding, which it was clear Flair wasn't going to be a factor in it, was down to 2.39, the show's lowest point of the night, which seems to eliminate the wedding itself as the key reason. With football opposition, the WWF didn't get the traditional overrun spike, as Rock and Undertaker vs. Benoit and Kane only drew a 6.82, well below the mid-7 average the overrun segment has been doing. WCW's Steiner vs. Nash main event did a 3.01. As far as head-to-head numbers for Raw, besides the 5.36 open, the quarters were 5.06 to 3.16, 4.98 ending of Rock, Foley, Benoit, Undertaker, Kane's segment and Dudley's vs. Hardy's, to 3.17, for Rick's return and Sting vs. Harris Twins, 5.80 Lita vs. Ivory, and that huge spike does indicate when Rick was gone, about 0.8 total switched shows, to 2.39 and finally 5.602 Cool vs. Guerrero in China, to 3.01. Over the 22 opposed shows since Russo returned to writing TV, as it compares with the range of the Sullivan era, 2.53 to 3.06, there have now been 2 shows that beat Sullivan's best, and 8 shows which drew ratings lower than Sullivan's worst. The other Russo show that beat 3.06, on May 15th, was also a show built around Flair, with the great angle where Russo went to Flair's house and ending with Flair beating Jarrett to win the title. New Japan officially announced a non-title Kensuke Sasaki vs. Toshiaki Kawada match for October 9th at the Tokyo Dome, and the results of what many thought literally for decades was the ultimate Japanese wrestling program have been very disappointing. The New Japan vs. All Japan program, which figured to be the hottest ticket seller in Japan over the next year, is starting with a supposed top star in each company. It's interesting because, as mentioned in many places, as a non-title match, a Kawada win is expected, but it also may be too predictable. However, a Kawada loss right away will knock the legs right out of the program far too early. It also puts Sasaki in the position as New Japan's top star, at least for the moment, which by virtue of him being IWGP champion, he should be, but has never truly been accepted by the public as. Unlike when New Japan started a similar angle with UWFI in late 1995, when after one tune-up match with smaller name guys, similar to the Chonofuchi match, which got over incredibly well, they won at the Dome in exactly 5 years to the day of this show with the legendary first Keiji Muto vs. Nobuhiko Tada match. At that point, and that was when wrestling in New Japan were considerably a bigger deal than they are today, and people believed UWFI was a shoot and Takada was the real deal, they sold 67,000 tickets for $6.1 million, both at the time Japanese and world records respectively, in just 3 days. This program started with a big hit with Masahiro Chono's appearance on the September 2nd Budokan Hall show, which got everyone involved excited. However, after the announcement of the main event, ticket sales for the Dome have been a disappointment. The angle is that Kawada issued a challenge to the top star of New Japan and Sasaki is mad because he didn't issue the challenge to him, and by not saying his name, considered it a slight. In hindsight, those close to the situation believe the problem is not only that the general public sees through the angle, seeing All Japan as a skeleton of what it once was, but also even though Kawada has more than a decade of being a top guy in the Japanese wrestling world, to most fans he had fallen to the number 4 native star in the company before the recent promotional split, behind Mitsuharu Misawa, who he was always behind in the pecking order, but also falling behind both Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama. Also announced for the show was the return of Shinya Hashimoto, in a weird match that seems to have no purpose against Tatsumi Fujinami. Also announced was Scott Norton vs. Steve Williams, which doesn't sound good on paper, but is intrigue for Japan since it is the top, at least as far as longtime tenure with the company, foreign star with New Japan against the top foreign star with All Japan, as his goes to tenure. Stan Hansen would be the top guy for All Japan, but at 51, it's pretty well accepted he's past his prime. In a battle of rising stars, Yutaka Yoshi of New Japan faces Taiyo Kiya of All Japan. The only other match announced was an IWGP Junior Heavyweight title match where Tatsuhito Takaiwa, or Kendo Kashin, if he beats Takaiwa in their title match this month, defends against Koji Kanemoto. On September 8th, they started pushing for a return of Shinya Hashimoto on the show, first hinting his opponent would be Manabu Nakanishi, who is at least pushed by New Japan as the strongest, even though he's not a particularly good worker, of the next generation of wrestlers because of his legit background. The angle they shot was that Hashimoto came to the New Japan office and challenged Tatsumi Fujinami, but the office suggested Nakanishi instead. Fujinami was in Fukuoka for the afternoon, but showed up a few hours later and said that the fans don't want to see him wrestle Hashimoto, but want to see him wrestle Nakanishi. In an announcement on September 12th, New Japan announced the match with Fujinami with Hashimoto saying it was Fujinami who gave him the chance to return after losing the match that he put up his career into Naoya Ogawa in April, and I believe for symbolic purposes of Hashimoto having to restart his career at the bottom, the match will open the show. No matches were announced for Masa Fuchi and Masahiro Chono, who started the program on September 2nd and will continue it on September 16th, so there figures to be another angle added on at that time. Fuchi said he still wanted revenge on Chono because he insulted the All Japan fans. It may involve Shiro Koshinaka. In the magazines they are playing up big that Koshinaka started his career under Giant Baba in All Japan back in 1978 and grew up with the group as an underneath guy and actually became a star in Mexico as Samurai Shiro as a tag team partner with Mitsuharu Misawa. At the time Koshinaka was considered a bigger star than Misawa, and was even sent by the company for training with Thesz. For a variety of reasons including Misawa being chosen ahead of him for the role as the second Tiger Mask in 1984, and that New Japan traditionally was a place for more opportunity for a junior heavyweight. Koshinaka, after returning from Mexico, didn't want to return to All Japan, and after meeting with Seiji Sakaguchi, it paved the way for New Japan to take him in 1985 since at the time wrestlers switching companies was still a rarity based on the old school Japanese traditions. They had Koshinaka go to the All Japan offices and pose for photos with Motoko Baba as well as the life-size wax museum Giant Baba, who is a fixture in the office, and the angle appears to be that Koshinaka will help the ailing All Japan due to loyalty in the feud and probably form a tag team with Fuchi against Team 2000. TV Asahi will broadcast the top matches in a special Monday night special from 11 p.m. to midnight taped from earlier that night and broadcast more matches subsequently in its regular Saturday night time slot. The show will air live on pay-per-view. This is where the difference in television culture between the US and Japan will become interesting. In the US, traditionally, the matches on pay-per-view are very rarely broadcast on free television on tape delay, let alone later that same day. Pay-per-view worked well in the US because traditionally American wrestling never showed the big match for free on television anyway, as the big match, before pay-per-view, was held at the local arena. In Japan, the psychology has always been that the big match is something you watch on television as opposed to see live, so paying money for something you are used to getting for free creates a totally different psychology. Kawada said that if he were to lose to Sasaki, it would kill the All Japan promotion. Hiroshi Haze, the current Japanese senator who was Sasaki's tag team partner, and later wrestled with and against Kawada in All Japan and has yet to offer an official affiliation in the All Japan/Pro Wrestling Noah split, said that he thought it would be a great match, but that he thinks Sasaki is stronger than Kawada, and said he hopes Kawada would win, and said he'd love to be part of this program but is busy doing his political work. In an update on our Olympic article, Klaus Wallas of Austria was definitely in the 1976 Olympics as a heavyweight in judo. Wallas, who later wrestled for the CWA and was being groomed to be the future big star of the promotion before he quit, as well as a few tours with New Japan in the mid-80s, was eliminated from the competition in the second round by another future pro wrestler, Alan Coage. Bad News Alan aka Bad News Brown. Coage on Wrestling Observer Live talked about Wallas, saying that 5 months before the Olympics, he and Wallas were both 245 pounds when they trained together in Austria. Then, when Wallas showed up at the Olympics, he was 290, almost all of it muscle, which was actually brought up when we asked him about steroid use in judo during his Olympic career, and much stronger. Coage managed to beat him with a new move he wasn't ready for late in the match, said he asked Wallas if he had done steroids to gain 45 pounds that quickly, and said that while Wallas denied it, he gave him a look while denying it that he took as confirmation. The latest plan to attempt to capitalize on the popularity of WWF wrestling is the formation of 2 new companies, both trying to use pro wrestling concepts with new ventures, one more sports-like and the other more entertainment-oriented. Fox Sports Net will be running twice-a-week shows starting in November of the World Sumo Wrestling League, WSL, with the idea of creating characters like wrestling does, from all over the world, combined with using hop-hop, R&B and rock music. The other is a revival of the old Glow, Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling concept, this time called WOW, Women of Wrestling, and headed by former Glow and POW promoter David McLean, whose background starts with working for Dick the Bruiser's promotion in Indianapolis. The WSL has a 52-week deal to air 30-minute shows on Tuesday and Wednesday afternoons starting on November 7th, with a start time of either 3 p.m. or 3:30 p.m. This was the same basic time slot Fox had negotiated with several people for a potential pro wrestling endeavor. The show will also air on Fox Sports International with no more than a 2-week lag in Canada, Sky in the UK, Asia, Australia, the Middle East and Latin America. Former WWF television executive Nelson Swegler is the main man behind the project along with Harry Krebs of Sanday Productions. The two are negotiating with other key pro wrestling executives who were part of the 80s WWF scene. The CFO for the project is Douglas Sages, who spent 13 years as the executive vice president and CFO for Titan Sports before leaving to become CFO of SEMS. The basic idea would be to run 4 house shows per month during a 5-day run each month. The idea would be to run television tapings similar to how the WWF ran its tapings in the 80s, taping 4 30-minute shows at both a Friday and a Saturday night taping, which would take care of all the television for a 4-week period. They would also run regular house shows every Monday and Tuesday night of the taping week. Like the 80s WWF, the tapings would be several weeks ahead. For example, according to plans, the first tapings would be on October 20th and October 21st for television shows that would air from November 7th through November 29th. They also will have ESPN2 coverage billed as Night of the Giants, with the first taping having aired on September 3rd at Caesars in Lake Tahoe, Nevada, which was taped this past April before a sellout crowd. They have a second ESPN special being taped on November 6th from the Taj Mahal Grand Ballroom in Atlantic City for a Jan. 17th air date. Emmanuel Yarborough, a former NCAA All-American wrestler, who was merely 380 pounds in college in the mid-80s, and gained greater fame as a free competitor in one of the early UFCs as well as doing some pro wrestling appearances for Ottawans in Europe and is now 710 pounds, is being pushed as the leading drawing card. They will also have competitors from Russia, Germany, Norway, Poland, New Zealand, Mongolia, Tonga, Maori, Nicaragua, Haiti as well as the United States. A second new promotion has McLean back in the news. McLean gained some notoriety in 1985 for starting a concept that some would say today was years ahead of its time, Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. The idea was to take surgically enhanced bleached blondes, give them about 6 weeks of training, and put them in the ring for some really bad matches, although those matches were actually good by comparison with some of the women's matches we've seen of late, and campy vignettes. Blow was a pretty big deal for the first 8 weeks of its run as far as short-term TV ratings due to the novelty of the scantily clad women wrestling. The ratings in many markets were comparable to the syndicated ratings of WWF and Mid-South. But after about 2 months the novelty faded, the ratings fell, and as expected the thing died when it went on the road for house shows and folded after 1 season. It spawned POW, a similar concept but more wrestling-based, using more well-trained wrestlers as less aspiring actresses, which also lasted 1 year in syndication and couldn't draw on the road. Other similar groups followed, including the LPWA, which even ran a very good pay-per-view show that nobody bought. Among the alumnuses of these groups included current WWF wrestler Ivory, who worked as Tina Ferrari in Glow and Tina Moretti in POW, Terry Power, Tori in WWF, and Reggie Bennett. The latest is WOW, Women of Wrestling, run by McLean, which starts in syndication on October 2nd on 99 stations including New in New York, K-Cop in Los Angeles and Wushu in Chicago. Due to the success of surgically enhanced bleached blondes with 6 weeks of training within the framework of WWF, and the fact the original idea for SmackDown was to do a series just like this, the first thoughts were it would be overexposure to do a second Raw-like show in the same week, so they went for a new concept. But after a cattle call looking for talent, they couldn't find enough people to build a TV show around, so they went back to what they knew, which was doing another version of Raw, and as it turned out, it was a pretty huge success, far more than the other version could have ever been. The show will be based out of the Great Western Forum in Los Angeles, which is where they'll train the wrestlers and do 3 hours of television taping every 3 weeks, with the first taping set for September 16th and October 7th. Rings announced its second King of Kings tournament with the same format as last year, taking place from October through February. Last year's 32-man tournament was considered a huge success, with an all-shoot format and numerous exciting matches. Dan Henderson, at 198 pounds, was a surprise and controversial winner in an open-weight division tournament, since the judging in several of the matches, including his semifinal win, was very much questionable. It also included the ring's highlight match of Kiyoshi Tamura winning a decision over Renzo Gracie in the quarterfinals. The 32-man tournament will consist of 2 separate 16-man tournaments held on October 9th at Tokyo Yoyogi Gym and December 22nd at Osaka Furitsu Gym. Like last year, they will consist of 8 first-round matches and 4 second-round matches at each site. The final 4 survivors from each show will meet in an old-style UFC or K1 Grand Prix 8-man one-night tournament in which the winner has to go through 3 fights in one night, which will take place on February 24th at Tokyo Sumo Hall. The only man announced for the tournament is that October 9th will feature the ring's debut of Ryushi Yanagisawa, 28, who fought for Pancrase from the company's inception in 1993 after starting as a pro wrestler with Pro Wrestling Fujiwara Gumi, before quitting the company earlier this year and most recently fighting in K1. For September 4th, with both shows going unopposed, Raw did a 4.24 rating, 4.25 first hour, 4.22 second hour, and a 9.7 share. Nitro did a 3.62 rating, 3.20 first hour, 4.03 second hour, and a 5.4 share. The regular season debut of Monday Night Football with the St. Louis Rams vs. Denver Broncos did a 15.51 rating and 27.0 share. The US Open in the regular Raw time slot going against Nitro drew a 1.48 rating. The Nitro rating is second highest of the year, although that's not as impressive as it sounds since it's only had 3 unopposed shows this year, all of which drew nearly identical numbers because it went unopposed, had to be considered a success because the rating was up from the previous week with far tougher competition coming from the NFL opener. The War Games main event going over 2 segments drew a 4.27 rating, making it the second highest rated match of the year from WCW behind the Hulk Hogan vs. Ric Flair match on February 14 at 4.36. However, the final quarter at 4.83 was the highest quarter-hour rating for the year on Nitro, and a number that actually beat out every quarter-hour on Raw. Of course, Raw was in a far worse time slot. Thunder on September 6 drew a 2.38 rating and 3.8 share, which was a downer coming off the strong quarter 2 days earlier. For the weekend of September 2nd to 3rd, Livewire did a 1.5 and Superstars a 1.4, both numbers higher than the shows have been doing, while Heat was way down to 1.76, largely because it started 30 minutes early because of US Open coverage beginning at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and there wasn't a ton of publicity. I don't recall it being mentioned once on either Raw or SmackDown, to that fact. For September 9th to 10th it was Livewire at 1.3 and Superstars at 1.3. ECW on TNN on September 1st and September 8th both drew a 1.0 rating. Lucha Libre on Galavision on September 5th fell to the lowest mark in recent memory, scoring only an 0.9 Hispanic rating. Mexico. A correction on the Fishman deal. His real name is Jose Angel Nájera, not Njpw. Magazines are saying his real age is 52, not 50. As it turns out, that show won't be on pay-per-view, but will instead air on free TV in Mexico. After losing his mask, Fishman immediately left the building and had nothing to do with the press, which is totally against Mexican culture as it pertains to the loser of a masked match. They seem to be building towards some sort of a CN Caras vs. Pierroth Jr. hair match confrontation for the September 29th anniversary show and next pay-per-view. On September 8th at Arena Mexico, they headlined by a one-night trios tournament with all the major teams in the company. In the finals, Los Villanos beat Los Hermanos Dinamita when Pierroth Jr. interfered, leading B3 to gain a submission on Caras. September 29th will be a major day for Lucha with not only the EMLL pay-per-view show, but AAA running their Summer Scandal show finally with Heavy Metal and Pero Aguayo Jr. vs. Latin Lover and Hector Garza and Tijuana running with a major show as well. There will apparently be a 4-way match coming up soon with La Parca putting up his mask and Pimpinela Escarlata, Dandy and El Satanico putting up their hair. September 15th at Arena Mexico is the Mexico vs. the World show. It's mainly Mexican teams against foreign teams. Main event is Los Hermanos Dinamita against a supposed Puerto Rican team of Pierroth Jr. and Gran Marcos Jr. and El Boricua, probably all of whom are from Mexico. Felino and Safari and Antifaz face a Caribbean team consisting of Mexico regulars. Pantera and Tony Rivera and Ricky Marvin face a Japanese team of Mexico regulars Ryo Saito and Nozawa and Secret Sasuke. Dr. Wagner Jr. and Blue Panther and Black Warrior also defend the CMLL Trios titles against Los Villanos. AAA did a TV taping on September 8th in Tijuana which had some wild stuff. In the main news, El Texano and Pirata Morgan captured the Mexican national tag titles from Pero Aguayo Jr. and Hector Garza in a match where they continued the storyline where Aguayo and Garza couldn't get along. They would trip each other up or punch each other to botch the other's high spots. The finish saw Aguayo hit Garza with a chair, and try to make sense out of this finish the ref then DQ'd Aguayo for hitting his partner with a chair, and because of the DQ, awarded the match to Texano and Morgan and the belts. At this point, Heavy Metal, who is also turning Rudo, joined with Aguayo in giving a beating to Garza, who did a stretcher job. AAA is building its main program for the fall around Latin Lover and Garza vs. Heavy and Pero Jr. Super Crazy worked the undercard and did a Jeff Hardy-like senton bomb from the top of the entranceway, which is about 10 feet up. AAA brought its own Psicosis and its own Mosco de la Merced. Since the original Psicosis is practically a god in Tijuana as Nicho el Millonario for the rival promoters, the fans chanted Nicho, Nicho, Nitro at the fake psychosis as well as thief at both wrestlers that they consider as imposters stealing the gimmicks. It got dangerous as they brawled in the crowd with AAA psychosis, actually former Tijuana mid-carder Leon Negro and Crazy, and the fans would kick the chairs psychosis would stand on to make him fall. La Parca and Mascara Sagrada apparently had a problem backstage at the Guas pay-per-view which nearly came to blows. Mano Negra Sr., who has been retired for about 18 months, is scheduled to return to EMLL to feud with Ringo Mendoza for the CMLL middleweight title. Ringo, who I believe is in his early 50s, is the last surviving pro wrestler to take a nickname after Ringo Starr. I guess that proves Elvis was bigger, since guys still imitate him in pro wrestling to this day. All Japan. To show how strange things have become, All Japan took out an ad in Tokyo Sports looking for people who want to train to become pro wrestlers. Pro Wrestling Noah. August 30th TV did a 1.8 rating. New Japan. They opened the new tour on September 9th in Kuroha for a memorial show for the late Masakazu Fukuda, who passed away of a cerebral hemorrhage after collapsing in the ring and never regaining consciousness, in Fukuda's hometown before 2,000 fans. On the tour, Nakanishi will have 8 major singles matches, and he won his first 4 over Yutaka Yoshi, Tadao Yasuda, Kenzo Suzuki, and Koshinaka. On September 10th in Hamamatsu, the IWGP Tag Champs Satoshi Kojima and Hiroyoshi Tenzan lost a non-title match to Yoshi and Takashi Iizuka. In what couldn't be taken as a good sign, they went against tradition on September 12th at Korakuen Hall and announced an IWGP Junior Tag title match as the main event, which ended with Minoru Tanaka and Koji Kanemoto retaining over Jushin Liger and Shinya Makabe in 21:46 when Tanaka defeated Makabe via submission. What was the bad sign is that they only sold 1,359 tickets for the show, which is the smallest New Japan Korakuen Hall crowd, at least for a full lineup card, that I can ever recall. As has been expected for some time, Tanaka officially announced he was leaving Battle Arts, which he was under contract to join New Japan. In Tanaka's final match with Battle Arts on September 7th, he defeated Ikuto Hidaka, who worked ECW several months back, at Korakuen Hall. Kazuyuki Fujita was training in Brazil this past week and said he would be attending the September 22nd UFC show to cheer on Yuki Kondo and that he wanted to do a UFC in 2001. Fujita is clearly a tough guy as to his ability to take punishment, and is a very good wrestler, but he's been the luckiest man in the world in Pride and they ought to quit while they're ahead, because he can be a shooting legend with wins over Shamrock and Kerr, but if he keeps fighting, he's going to run into someone who isn't going to have a medical problem a few minutes into the match, and if they can strike, he's in trouble because his striking defense isn't good. Hiroshi Tanahashi is out for several months with some sort of broken bone. The regular TV show on August 13th drew a 3.7 rating and the September 2nd show drew a 2.8. New Japan was preempted on August 20th and August 27th. They had a 3-hour G1 special which was a pretty good show on the afternoon of August 13th that I never got the number up for some reason. In another bad sign, after being preempted for 2 weeks, the September 2nd show only aired the Ishizawa vs. Ryan Gracie as the feature and filled the rest of the show with replays of the semifinals and finals from G1, which were 2 great matches out of 3, but had already aired in their entirety on August 13th. Other Japan notes. Hector Milian of Cuba, who was training in Japan for the Olympics and last week stated that he was interested in going into pro wrestling afterwards, was listed in Sports Illustrated as a favorite for the bronze medal in Greco-Roman wrestling at 286. Alexander Karelin was of course listed as the gold medal favorite. Japanese are favorites for the gold in judo at both 220, Kosei Inoue, and Unlimited, Shinichi Shinohara, and if either is successful, expect them to be heavily recruited by wrestling promoters. Milian is an Olympic veteran, winning the gold medal at 220 in 1992 and placing 5th in the same weight division in 1996. He won his gold beating Dennis Kozlowski of the United States, who pro-wrestled himself briefly, in the championship match in sudden death overtime after they drew in regulation. Minoru Fujita and Grand Naniwa announced after leaving Michinoku Pro that Naniwa would stay in Japan and work as an independent while Fujita said that he wanted to go overseas. LLPW will be presenting the second L1 Women's UFC 8-person tournament on November 22nd at Tokyo Yoyogi Gym. Announced as appearing are Shinobu Kondori, who would be the favorite, Rumi Kazama and Mizuki Endo of LLPW, Yumiko Hado of AJW, Yoko Takahashi of JD and Naoko Kumagia with 2 spots often. Booker Kazama wants to bring in 2 athletes from the Sydney Olympics for the remaining spots. The first L1 took place in 1995 with 315-pound Russian judoka Svetlana Gundarenko suffocating the competition, including Kandori in the finals. Michinoku has shows October 8th and October 9th in Tokyo, with Great Sasuke doing singles main events against Masamuchi Marufuji of Noah the first night and against Dos Caras the second night. Kazunari Murakami, after taking a pretty bad beating at the finish of his match at Pride against Masaki Sadake, returned to pro wrestling on September 7th for Battle Arts at Tokyo Korakuen Hall. Murakami teamed with Naoyuki Taira to lose to Yuki Ishikawa and Karl Malenko, no relation. Murakami's right eye was swollen badly from punches from Sadake and worked the show with a broken orbital bone, and has been suffering from severe headaches since the match. There apparently has been internal dissension within the company of late, with the younger wrestlers and President Ishikawa. They called a meeting at this show and Ishikawa got everyone to agree to work together to save the tour that starts later this week featuring the Road Warriors. It'll be interesting to see what the Road Warriors mean in Japan in 2000, as they were a huge deal in Japan in the late 80s, and Japan is a lot better about honoring past their prime legends than the US after Atsushi Onita announced and did what he billed as his Japanese retirement match. He now is trying to get around his millionth retirement stipulation by booking an explosive barbed wire match featuring himself on US Army bases, which he claims would be US government property and thus technically not Japan, on the island. He stopped talking about working XPW, which was the talk several weeks back. Masakatsu Funaki made his debut playing a samurai in a movie that opens on October 7th. Funaki is a movie buff, averaging watching 250 movies per year. Here and there. A UK-based documentary called Gaea Girls appeared at a film festival this past week in Toronto. The UK crew followed the path of Saika Takeuchi for 1 year in her training and early matches with the company. Most of the movie is subtitled in English. It's done by Vixen Films, produced by Kim Longinado and Yana Williams, who did Akanda afterwards and appeared to have been totally worked in doing the film, as they believed wrestling to be a shoot, and the movie showed the women wrestlers in tears after losses. Told because of that, it would be insulting to a wrestling fan's intelligence. For a non-fan, it would be more interesting as it shows just what lengths the girls go through in their training to become a pro wrestler. Chigusa Nagao, as the teacher, owner and matriarch of the group, is said to come off as a real bitch to an average viewer because of how she tortured the women, which is how wrestlers are taught in the old-style dojos. The Urban Wrestling promotion has postponed its first TV tapings twice, but it's still claiming it will have its first taping within the next month and has the syndication lined up. Dusty Rhodes Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling will have its first TV taping on October 28th. They are running every Saturday and Sunday in Georgia, mainly doing sold shows, with Ray Lloyd, formerly Glacier, as champion, as well as Luther Biggs and Ron Race, and occasional appearances by Dustin Rhodes and Barry Windham. Dusty himself also wrestles on occasion for the group. They are trying to syndicate the TV into Florida and Georgia and are hopeful to get in the old traditional 6 p.m. Saturday night time slot on Turner South. 2 changes in the NWA title tournament. Dan Severn was pulled due to his being added to the UFC show 3 days later. Paul Heyman pulled Steve Corino as well. They'll be replaced by Jerry Flynn and Chris Harris, who holds the North American title for the NWA Nashville promotion and is also the bogus Sting on some WCW broadcasts. At one point there was consideration given to putting Corino over for the belt, and putting it back on Severn was at least considered at some point as well. Wrestling legend Harley Race, 57, was arrested on September 5th for boating while intoxicated near Lake of the Ozarks State Park in Missouri. Race was arrested at a sobriety checkpoint and charged with a Class B misdemeanor of boating while intoxicated, which has a maximum 6 months in prison or a $500 fine. Race was released later that day on $500 bail. In 1990, Race was involved in a boating accident, where his own boat exploded and 2 people in the boat it collided with were injured, and was charged with negligent operation of a boat. Another wrestling legend, Thesz, 84, is back in the news, having been hired by Coco Pelle's gym in Orlando, Florida to start a submission wrestling program. Thesz, who is director of the pro wrestling wing of the American Wrestling Hall of Fame in Newton, Iowa, moved from his longtime home in Virginia Beach, Virginia to Winter Haven, Florida. Douglas Chevalier, 41, who worked indies in Michigan as the Canadian Destroyer and Hoss James, passed away on September 10th at his home in Charleston, Michigan of an apparent heart attack. Chevalier also ran the Destroyer Wrestling School. Regarding the Australian Wrestling Federation tour headlined by Psychosis vs. 2 Cold Scorpio, the August 31st show in Melbourne drew about 250, September 1st in Gold Coast drew 150, September 3rd in Sydney drew 200. The crowds were small but rabid and the wrestlers worked hard. The small crowds are blamed by the far more hyped superstars of wrestling tour with Dennis Rodman and the upcoming WCW tour. The main events were said to be excellent, and the September 3rd match in Sydney was said to be the best match held in Australia since a 1993 match with Jushin Liger vs. Chris Benoit. Blitzkrieg was the same Jeremiah Ross that worked last year for WCW and was voted Observer's Rookie of the Year, and then fired. Ryuji Yamakawa of Big Japan was brought in for the Combat Zone show on September 9th in Sewell, New Jersey. He got body slammed off the roof of a truck about 15 feet through two tables that were lit, and he caught himself on the fire. MMA. The September 22nd UFC show will now be headlined by Dan Severn vs. Pedro Hitso, instead of Tito Ortiz vs. Yuki Kondo for the middleweight title. Ortiz is off the show due to a contract dispute, which is actually kind of sad, not only because Ortiz vs. Kondo was a very interesting matchup, but because in the midst of the dispute when Ortiz management pulled him from the show, after the fact they were willing to compromise to get him back. Semaphore Entertainment Group already booked an unknown Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu star Alexander Cafe Dante So to the U.S. audience, instead of seeing Ortiz, who is one of the few stars the company has at least known to their base audience. They have an unknown Japanese guy against an unknown Brazilian guy to their base audience. Even though Ortiz was trained and ready to go, and both sides made amends and agreed Ortiz would be brought back for an upcoming show, they wouldn't put the match back together for this coming show. Severn, 42, who holds the WEF heavyweight title, which is UFC's rival organization, agreed this past week to replace Gary Goodridge on short notice, and there is an agreement that if Severn wins, he'll get a title shot at Kevin Randleman. Goodridge had to be pulled due to his being knocked out in the Pride show. Severn did a lengthy Japanese interview last week where he said he wanted to continue fighting through June of 2003. Some notes from the Pride pay-per-view that aired on September 8th. They aired every match from the Seibu Dome except the Vitor Belfort vs. Daijiro Matsui opener, which was a boring match. They also aired in a 3:30 broadcast 4 matches from the Jan. 30th Tokyo Dome: Coleman vs. Sadake, Kerr vs. Ensign Inoue, Vovchankin vs. Alexander Otsuka, and Fujita vs. Hansa Nyman. The added matches hurt the show as a whole because the Jan. 30th matches were a weak follow-up after the so-called live show, which was actually, and this is a credit to the announcing of Steven Quadros and Eddie Bravo to an extent, better than seeing the original live pay-per-view tape from Japan. Part of it is on the American broadcast, and this has been the case in every Pride American pay-per-view. The impact and sound of the punches comes across so much better than on the Japanese live show, which makes the matches better. All the matches that aired came off as good, and it came across as an excellent pay-per-view event. Some of the weights listed here last week were a few pounds off, as they had the real weigh-in weights on this show, which they didn't on the live show. Shamrock actually came in at 211 and Fujita at 245, which is why Fujita looks so huge and thick next to him. They still have to learn to market the entertainment aspect of the show, as they edited out the best ring entrances, Giant Ochiai and Gary Goodridge, which for American entertainment, the ring entrances of the ring card girls, the pyro, etc. are what would make the show seem major league. Granted, at this point, casual fans don't even know it exists, and to the hardcores, they only want to see good quality fights. But it's the trappings around the fights, and DSE is actually good at this because they spend money for the total show, that to a casual fan makes the difference between a major league event and just another of the zillion hours of TV sports every week. They did note that Sakuraba, Fujita, Ishizawa, Ogawa, and Murakami were pro wrestlers, and credit Antonio Inoki for developing a stable of pro wrestlers that can actually fight in real fights. For Murakami, whose ring outfit had a UFO patch, they said UFO was a famous pro wrestling organization and blamed his loss on being rusty after switching from real fighting to pro wrestling a few years ago, and rightfully noted Ishizawa had no punch defense. In the closing credits for the show was Barry Bloom, who is Shamrock's agent, who is the most notable agent for pro wrestlers. And another connection is that Pride is opening a California office and has either hired or has talked of hiring Sonny Wanu. The Full Contact Fighter TV show has completed its 13-week commitment on the Sunshine Network. The network is up for renewing the show, but right now it's up in the air unless the show gets a sponsor. While no matches have been officially announced, although they've already shot the angle for Ogawa vs. Sadake, the Pride advertising, priced from $1,000 for ringside down to $70 for the cheap seats, for Osaka Castle Hall on Halloween night, lists Sakuraba, Goodridge, Otsuka, Takada, Henzo Gracie, Inoue, Sadake, Fujita, Kerr, and Coleman as appearing, and they've also announced Yatsu as appearing. The Rings USA tournament concludes on September 30th in Moline, Illinois. The main bouts will be four-man tournaments involving the survivors of the July 15th and July 22nd tournaments in Orem, Utah and Honolulu. At under 200, it'll be first-round pairings of Jeremy Horn versus Hiromitsu Kanehara and Yasuhito Namakawa versus Chris Haseman, all of whom are Ring's Japanese veterans. A heavyweight division will have Bobby Hoffman versus Eric Pele and Tom Sauer versus Aaron Brink. Brink, who already lost to Hoffman in the tournament, is replacing Tsuyoshi Kosaka, who pulled out of the Hoffman match due to an injury suffered on the August 23 show in Osaka. ECW. The long-talked-about plan of moving from doing bi-monthly pay-per-view shows to going monthly appears on the books, as they are doing October 1st in St. Paul, November 5th in Villa Park, Illinois and December 3rd at the Hammerstein Ballroom in Manhattan. With buy rates dropping badly this year for WCW and also dropping of late for ECW, only WWF has held steady and in some cases shown increases during the early part of the year before leveling off the past few months. With 36 live pro wrestling PPVs on the books already out of 52 Sundays in 2001, actually only an increase from 31 this year, viewers are more and more going to pick and choose rather than make every show a must-see affair, although I guess that has been the case now for some time anyway. The wrestlers weren't paid again this week. Paul Heyman at the Mississauga TV taping told the wrestlers that the company was living week to week, hand to mouth until a TV deal is made. He said because it would take a few days to get the money needed to make payroll this week out of Canada converted into US dollars and deposited in the bank, and since the show did a big gate, the company should be solvent cash-wise by the end of this week, at which point the checks would be FedExed out. The wrestlers have been for some time one pay period behind when one was missed and never made up a few months back. Of late, the wrestlers have been getting checks on Saturday but post-dated until late the next week, usually 5 days after the checks are handed out, so the money coming in from the weekend which is needed to make payroll is deposited. Heyman told the wrestlers, and Dreamer largely backed him up, that he would be leaving early in the week for Los Angeles to close a TV deal and wouldn't be coming back to New York until the deal is finalized. Most feel a deal is right at being done with USA, but the potential problem is the Delaware Court of Appeals, which still hadn't ruled as of press time on whether or not WWF could move to TNN on September 25th as is currently scheduled, still hangs in the balance. He also told the wrestlers there is a good chance the road shows this coming weekend in Des Moines, Omaha and Sioux City would be canceled. The advances in 2 of the 3 cities, and in particular the third, isn't strong and they aren't in the position to be able to lose money going on the road. The word going around WCW was that several ECW wrestlers were inquiring about getting a job. In addition, there are a lot of injuries that probably could use some rest rather than threatening the pay-per-view. Dreamer injured his left shoulder and it appeared to be serious on September 7th in Cleveland. He was in a sling and in a lot of pain the rest of the weekend. At press time he hadn't been fully examined, but there was fear of a torn rotator cuff and that would require surgery and several months off. This changes most of the pay-per-view undercard, so right now only 3 matches are finalized. The original plan was to shoot an angle at TV this week to lead to Dreamer and Corino versus Anderson and Swinger and Diamond in a 2-on-3. C.W. Anderson's shoulder also popped out on September 9th in a match with Van Dam and his arm was in a sling by the end of the weekend. He landed on his hand, which popped his shoulder, in falling from the top rope after taking a Van Daminator. Credible suffered a broken finger on September 9th and had it splinted on September 11th, but won't be missing any action. His neck has been sore for several weeks, ever since the match that aired on TNN, where he was on Van Dam's shoulders and Cash came off the top rope with a Frankensteiner, didn't quite get high enough and both went down out of control. Cash broke his nose in Buffalo landing on a dive, but worked the next night. Anton didn't work the weekend, but was at all the shows, with bruised ribs. Mama Luke after the weekend shows was having hip and rib problems. The original plan was to bounce around the tag titles, but Heyman has been so impressed with the FBI that planned title changes before the pay-per-view were scrapped. They're going to add a stip at the last minute for Credible versus Lynn. That's a big one, to act as if Lynn has to win or it's his last shot, or putting up his hair or career or something that hasn't been settled to add more drama to the match. Everyone except Easy Money and Prodijet made it across the border, which in some cases, being that at least 2 of the guys have several arrests, was a little bit of a surprise. Money and Prodijet were traveling together and apparently one of them had a prior, so the car wasn't let in. The Mississauga, Ontario on September 9th, which is a Toronto suburb, drew a near sellout of 5,000. Most considered the show a major success, as virtually every wrestler was over and the fans knew every storyline and were hot for the product. They also sold every bit of merchandise they brought, although because of high taxation and lower exchange rate, the The amount of merchandise brought was below normal standards for a show expected to draw this many people, and Heyman estimated they actually will only come out of Canada with $80,000 US from the live gate. Psicosis pinned Julio De Niro quickly in a quick bad match. The two didn't work well together all weekend. Diamond and Swinger beat Matthews in York. FBI beat During and Roadkill in the best match on the show. Mamaluke was injured after working some great Lucha Libre spots with Roadkill. Sal E interfered, giving During a powerbomb for the finish. Nova beat Hamrick. They worked well overall but blew some spots. Elektra and Jazz went at it. Then Chetty ran in and hit Nova with a chair, and Chetty claimed to swing the best chair shot of anyone in wrestling. This naturally brought Mahoney in. The Baldies attacked him. Chilly Willie made the save with a surprising reaction. Willie wore a Mississauga Ice Dogs jersey, the local junior hockey league team, and got a lot of boos, since virtually nobody was actually from the suburbs and 90% of the crowd was from Toronto, and nobody in that crowd recognized the jersey, which looked similar to and was thought to be a Buffalo Sabres jersey, so Willie didn't get the desired reaction. In the match, Mahoney bled from both his head and arm, and Angel bled as well. Mahoney worked really hard and it was said to be a really good brawl. For the TNN Open, they brought out Lynn Credible and Corino wound up out there. Corino and Lynn both said they deserved a title shot, and Commissioner Spike Dudley, doing a low-rent Mick Foley, announced they would have a three-way dance. Rhino came out and attacked Dudley, but New Jack came in, moving very slow, with some garbage can shots on Rhino and a vacuum cleaner to the crotch. Credible and Rhino wound up leaving New Jack laying. A Cash vs. Whipwreck TV title match went about 5 minutes when Rhino laid both men out. Cash was so mad he wanted Rhino right then and there and offered to put up the title. Rhino won the belt in 3:35 with a spear through the table. The title change was to set up the RVD vs. Rhino match on the October 1st pay-per-view as a TV title match. RVD came out after to heat that up and they did a quick pull-apart. They did basically the same angle they did the previous week for the Hardcore Show Open to set up an apparent Cyrus vs. Gertner match on pay-per-view. The segment both nights was said to be not good, because guys who shouldn't be doing things physically were doing things physically. Louis dangerously was doing a promo when Gertner attacked him. Cyrus ran in and he and Louis started double-teaming Gertner until Styles made the save wielding a chair. Van Dam beat Anderson in the match where Anderson's shoulder popped out. In the three-way for the title, all three men juiced. One ref got bumped. Heel ref Danny Daniels came out, but he ended up brawling with yet another ref. Lynn had Credible up for his piledriver, but Corino superkicked Lynn and Credible hits his spinning tombstone to pin Lynn. Lynn was out first even though he's in the pay-per-view main event as the challenger because the match had to have the Francine vs. Dawn Marie catfight and they had to go to the finish right after that spot, which was Credible scoring the pin with his tombstone. This was the bout Credible broke his finger in, although nobody knows exactly when this occurred as he didn't notice it until his finger looked crooked after the match. Sandman caned him after the match and left doing the beer gimmick. On the September 8th Buffalo show, which got mixed reviews other than a main event that was said to be hot, it was headlined by Credible and Rhino over Lynn and Sandman due to the heel ref gimmick. Styles got involved on the first shooting of the angle where Cyrus blindsided Gertner with a chair doing a Hardcore TV Open and Styles made the save chasing Cyrus out with a chair. After During and Roadkill beat York and Matthews, the FBI attacked During and Roadkill to set up a tag title program since Tajiri and Whipwreck are on the shelf with Tajiri gone for a few weeks to get his working papers in order. Chetty and Nova have officially broken up and did a pull-apart. Cash beat Psicosis in what many noted as the most negative spot of the show, when fans paid no attention to a sick over-the-top plancha by Cash that he appeared all banged up from and came up with a bloody nose because of a chant directed at a woman who was taking off her top. Psicosis didn't look good again. There was a group of about a dozen fans claiming to be the Aldo Montoya fan club, Credible's WWF ring name, and Credible threw a drink at them. The estimated crowd of 2,000, some estimates were less than that, was barely more than half of what ECW usually draws in Buffalo, which for consistent attendance, has been the company's hottest live event market for the past year or two. ECW has expressed some interest in Michael Shane, who has already worked some prelims for the company and worked for WCW this past week, who is the nephew of Shawn Michaels, and Ted Annis, who wrestles as Teddy Hart, the nephew of Bret Hart, with the idea of feuding them when they get established. It's not as if this is anything imminent, it's just something that has been batted around. Bad News Allen said that he believes Ted Annis will end up being the best wrestler ever in the family, which is pretty high praise when you think about it. Actually, everyone praises Annis' work and he's said to be a natural worker inside the ring like his famous uncles and better than they were at a similar age, which is high praise since Owen was one of the best flyers in the world from day one and Bret was having great matches with Dynamite, and granted, Dynamite at that time may have been one of the 3 best guys in the world, when he was also very young, but people are far less kind to his overall attitude and maturity, which is why WWF dropped him from his developmental deal so quickly. A fan in Raleigh filed a lawsuit against Paul Heyman, Rob Satkowski, Van Dam, and Donald Ray Carroll, owner of the Ritz Theater, for alleged injuries that took place on a February 7, 1999 show at a house show in Raleigh. The suit, filed by 44-year-old Michael Murray, alleges that Van Dam did a flip into the crowd, which sent him to the hospital with permanent back and leg injuries. The lawsuit alleges Van Dam was under the influence of drugs at the time of the incident. The lawsuit reads that his mental and physical impairment from the ingestion of controlled substances caused him to miss his target and hit Murray, who was sitting in the second row. The complaint also claimed that ECW promoted the use of marijuana and LSD among its wrestlers, obviously the Van Dam 420 shirt and the acid drop being the name of Spike Dudley's finisher, and noted some crowd chants at ECW events with marijuana or LSD references. A story about this was in the Raleigh News and Observer over the weekend, and all those involved in the lawsuit didn't comment on it due to it being pending litigation. Credible on the Observer live show talking about the previous pay-per-view in Los Angeles and the XPW incident which took place right as his main event with Dreamer was starting, said he didn't want to sell what they did, but that it did screw up the main event match in that they were sent home early and only did about 40% of what they were planning because of all the commotion. TNN show on September 8 was probably the best TNN show in a long time, mainly due to the main event, but the entire show was real good and a hot crowd really put over the opening angle. The show opened with Cyrus canceling TNN, Heyman laying him out from behind with a phone shot, and Rhino putting Heyman, who looked to be bigger than Rhino, through a table. Cash's title win over Rhino was a totally wild scene. The match itself was actually just a backdrop for a hot Sandman ring entrance, a continual series of brawls leading to a Van Dam ring entrance leading to Van Dam doing his Van Daminator and Van Terminator on Rhino and both Van Dam and Cash coming off the top on Rhino for the pin and TV title win. Cash also did a great springboard flip plancha onto half the roster outside to catch him. Even Mahoney over Blue Boy wasn't bad, even though the match was clearly just an excuse to put Jasmine St. Clair on TV and do a spot where Mahoney held her upside down so her dress would fly down and fans would see the panty shot. Blue Boy is tons better in the ring having dropped 100 pounds, but I can't come up with what you can possibly do with him. The tag title match with FBI beating Whipwreck and Tajiri was a 4.25 stars match. Tajiri was just incredible again. It's even more impressive when you consider that Guido suffered a broken eardrum in the opening slapfist with Tajiri. When you list the best workers in the US right now, his name has to very close to, if not at the very top of the list. Guido is really underrated and Mamaluke's selling and bumps were great, although his longevity is already in question. Guido pinned Tajiri sort of clean with a chair and a kiss of death on a chair. WCW. I made Nash vs. Booker for the title a cage match on the pay-per-view, as if the cage means a thing these days, and they made the scaffold match a mixed tag with Kidman and Medusa vs. Wilson and Douglas, which makes a bad-sounding match even worse. I guess they could have a woman do a stunt person air mattress dive. Actually, I was told both women are scheduled to take a bump off the scaffold into a gimmick spot, but that may change as neither woman is exactly thrilled about it. As something different. Goldberg vs. Steiner if no DQ, Storm vs. Rection has Major Guns returning to MIA if Rection wins, and FAs and Vito vs. Thrillers has been added as a straight 8 or 10. Not sure if Conan will be in man elimination match. Vito low back was injured on Nitro and he couldn't work Thunder, but was saying he would work the pay-per-view. Nitro in Charlotte before a crowd that didn't care about anything but seeing Ric Flair, and were none too happy seeing him in nothing but a cameo. Mysterio Jr. and Guerrera beat Chronic for the tag titles. No crowd reactions. Conan was hilarious. When he was asked if they were going to do the face full of stuff trademark spot in the match, he said no, because Chronic wouldn't sell it. They sold nothing. Conan did get yelled at after the match for saying something too inside. Harris twins attacked Adams with a TV camera. They should have just used one of those chains because throwing it around costs a whole lot less money. Disco gave Clark the stunner, Juvie gave him the 450 and Ray gave him with leg drop to the groin off the top for the pin. Cat came out. Ms. Jones challenged Jarrett. Jarrett and Steiner then beat up Cat. Reno beat Vito after a ref bump when Johnny the Bull came out, in the guise of making the save, but turned on Vito. It was one of those swerves where everyone watching knew what was going to happen. Weren't Johnny and Vito feuding the last we saw of Johnny anyway? At least in WWF swerves that make no sense, they kept straight who was on whose side at the time of the injury. Medusa beat Wilson via DQ in 37 seconds when Douglas interfered. Douglas gave Medusa a belly-to-belly and put her in the STF. Kidman saved. Madden said that the STF was invented by Thesz, who was also known for beating up women. As it turns out, when Thesz found out about the remark, he was not amused. Awesome came out in a Partridge Family bus singing the theme song to the show. I figure you have to be 38 years old minimum to get that, and they've driven everyone from that age group away. At least they're giving Awesome a gimmick that he can headline shows with. That was facetious. Jarrett beat Ms. Jones, who actually had training and threw some good kicks when Kat handcuffed Jarrett. Jones went for the guitar, Jarrett kicked her and laid her out with the guitar. Duggan came out and retired. It's really sad with all the swerving that when he came out and talked about cancer, there was very little sympathy in the crowd. Crowd shots would show maybe one of every 30 fans, all seemingly over 40, who were caring, and the rest looked bored, just doing the Pavlovian flag pops. He gave his gimmick, while crying, to General Rection, so the MIAs will have the flag as the recycled version of Duggan. Storm challenged Rection to a match, which ended when Duggan shoved Storm off the top into a Rection power slam. The MIAs came in waving the flag after. Stacy got a registered letter, apparently that revealed David wasn't the father. They had the wedding. Crowbar was the best man, portrayed as a total goof. Daphne was there. Let me get this straight. He dumped her after being engaged to her a few months back, and now she's in the wedding party? I know it happened on 90,210 probably. Madden was hilarious with his comments on Stacy and her parents throughout all of this, and she did look ridiculously good as a bride and somehow still isn't showing at all. Fans didn't care at all about this except popping for Anderson and Rick's entrance. Anderson gave a speech to David about not how it's easier to ask for forgiveness than for permission. For those of you who are wrestlers getting married, when other wrestlers enter the room, don't play their entrance music. Anyway, the cops arrested Rick was violation of a restraining order and the wedding stopped. Fans were really upset, not about the wedding ending, but they recognized that was all they were seeing of Rick. They did a segment claiming Russo had suffered a blood clot in the brain and needed emergency brain surgery. Clearly, this was a knock on Hart's column in the Calgary paper, which had a lot of heat from many within the company. Sting beat Harris twins. Both twins were killing Sting with big chains. Chronic came out with little chains and pounded on He twins, and Sting pinned on. David wanted to marry Stacy again. David and Stacy facially both looked totally embarrassed out there. Finally, when asked if anyone objected, she grabbed the mic, said David wasn't the father, and ran off into the limo with David chasing. So who is the father? Of course the original plan was for Rick, but we're told it has changed. Which means it'll probably end up being Russo. While the limo took off, Jarrett and the Thrillers pounded on Awesome when Awesome was trying to show Pamela Paulshock the inside of his bus painted up like the Partridge Family bus from the early 70s, and he was even singing the theme to the TV show. That career killer gimmick they started him with was more apropos than we thought. Anyway, he's being a team player, but from all accounts, he hates it even worse than everyone else hates it. Nash and Steiner went 2 minutes before they beat up on T and Goldberg for a long time. They made their own save, which brought Jarrett driving the Partridge Family bus and the Thrillers to the ring, and they laid out T and Goldberg. They handcuffed Goldberg to the bus and Steiner laid him out with a pipe. Goldberg, after taking the pounding, pulled the grating off the front of the bus as the show went off the air. The original script called for Goldberg to be handcuffed and Jarrett backed the bus up, dragging him like he was crucified. It was changed at the last minute to what happened. There were reports that Goldberg went into business for himself on the last spot, and if people had seen the script, that would seem to be the case, as only a few people were told of the change, which was a last-minute deal. Eric Bischoff was announced on September 7th as being named to the advisory board of HollywoodPartners.com Incorporated, a marketing and promotions company. In the Bischoff bio, it listed him as heading WCW from 1994 through September 1999, mentioning nothing about his return, and talked about his proposed show Road Rage, and listed it as being shopped around as opposed to having a done deal. Russo told several employees on September 8 that no matter what Siegel and Bischoff have said publicly, that the stories of Bischoff meeting with Siegel about buying the company were true and that he's been trying to do so since April. There is also a Japanese promotion looking at buying it, although I'm not sure which one. Some notes from September 12 in Roanoke for the Thunder and Worldwide tapings. Hayabusa was there, but was only going to be put on Worldwide against the Frog. However, he didn't have documentation of a physical or a blood test since nobody told him ahead of time he'd needed to get licensed in Virginia, so the commission wouldn't let him work. This was his last day in WCW, so he ended up never wrestling. Former WWF developmental wrestler Scott Overholzer, Scotty Saber, worked as a jobber. Scotty Patrick. Steve Sharp, Ali in Memphis, who is a hell of a good interview, also played a jobber role on Worldwide for the Thrillers in a 6-man tag, as did former High Voltage member Robbie Rage. For Thunder, the theme of the show was David confronting everyone about if they were the father and laying some guys out. In a weird segment, Nash and Steiner and Jarrett came out with Ms. Jones. They wanted to do a kidnapping, but Sam wouldn't let it, so she was out there and not acting as if it was against her will. They asked for a replay and told her to lay down for Jarrett to cover, which he did, till T and Cat saved. Jarrett ended up laying out Dave Penzer with a guitar, which was an excuse to get Pamela Paulshock as the ring announcer. Jindrak and O'Hare beat Disco and Tigress, but Disco left for help and Tigress was left alone to be pinned. T promised if he won the title on the pay-per-view, he'd give Sting a shot. Awesome tried to hit on Major Guns. Storm dragged her off. Awesome threw Skipper off the set, but Jarrett laid him out with the stroke after. They set up a tag with Rection and Duggan against Storm and Skipper, and if Rection and Duggan won, Major Guns comes back to MIA. One of the best parts of the show was a vignette where a kid wanted a photo of Nash, and Nash bullied the father into paying $50 for the photo, and Steiner flexed his arm in the kid's face so the kid wasn't even visible in the photo. Shane and Tori versus Kidman and Medusa ended up brawling up the balcony except Medusa, so her team won via core. Wilson was thrown over, but she hung on and eventually never took the bump. Tenay interviewed Rick, who stormed out when he was accused of being the father. Sting beat Jarrett in February 3rd Falls, basically with 2 ref bumps. Jarrett passed out in the Scorpion and Sting dropped Jarrett's arm 3 times and declared himself the winner of the match. Stacy said to David she didn't know who the dad was, and Anderson came out. David accused Anderson. After he calmed down, Anderson cut a promo on her saying she's full of it. Duggan was buried backstage under a flag, so Rection had to work a handicap match, which he lost to the half-crab of Storm, W/Skipper. Duggan, all beaten up, ran out and hit the ring just as Rection tapped. The plan is for Duggan to turn heel and turn on the US fans for not caring about him and join Storm. Chronic won a 3-way over Harris Twins and Ray and Juvie. Ray and Juvie just watched while Chronic won, but Harris attacked them after with chains. Main was Cat and T versus Nash and Steiner, with the winner of the fall becoming world champ. No winner, as Steiner had T in the recliner when Goldberg drove a motorcycle to ringside and speared and jackhammered Steiner. Thunder on September 6th, taped the night before, was probably the most entertaining WCW TV show in several weeks, largely because of the excellent segment involving Hart and Goldberg. There were several matches in the 6 minutes range, so the show didn't seem to be rushing from segment to segment like Nitro usually does, and the interview segments also didn't appear frantic and rushed like the pre-tapes often do. Kiwi beat Loco to get the Cruiser title shot at pay-per-view. It's funny how they've dropped characters when Stevie Ray, supposedly from Harlem, in one breath talked about being trained by Scott Casey in Texas, and then saying how Kiwi, who was supposed to be the makeup guy and not a wrestler, is now a trained wrestler by Paul Orndorff at the power plant. Tenay interviewed David and Hancock about the wedding. Tenay played heel, but once again Tenay's closing line got a babyface pop from the live crowd. Segment was largely based on whether Rick would come to the wedding, which, if I recall, Arn Anderson already said on Nitro that he would. There were a lot of complaints internally about not pushing the certainty and the fact that Flair would return on Nitro harder on TV the week before, particularly since Raw was returning to the regular slot and Nitro needed any edge it could muster. Segment wasn't good until Tenay at the end said he gave the two of them 6 months tops, which was the line that popped the crowd. The Thrillers went back to the power plant. They all attacked Mike Graham. That was funny because Graham leg dived Sanders and put him in a figure 4, and when there are 6 guys ready to jump you, the best thing to do is run, and the worst thing to do is to take one guy to the ground and let the other 5 stomp the hell out of you. They also attacked Orndorff, who in every camera shot posed tilted so his good arm, which he clearly had pumped up before taping, was right in front of the camera. Danny Farquhar, who is somehow connected with Don Fry, and worked New Japan as Dan Devine with Reno and Chuck Palumbo, made the save. 3 count challenged Chronic. Although I'm sure everyone will deny this was supposed to be Karagia's bone for not going to Human Resources to complain about Goldberg. As it turned out, Chronic hardly sold a thing, but did get counted out brawling with the Harris twins. Bout was still terrible. The original plan for the match was for 3 count to pound on Chronic early and get the advantage using baseball bats. Chronic would make a comeback but then get pinned when the Harris twins interfered. Chronic got the baseball bat beating nixed, so they never sold anything at the beginning, and got the pin changed to a weak-looking countout. As you can imagine, people are shaking their heads given there are guys sitting at home for not doing what was scripted. Abbott still KO'd all 3 guys after. As it turns out, if that's being nice, I'd hate to be punished. Maybe I'd like to be, because in WCW, punishment is being taken off TV over July 4th weekend and being paid in full. Crowbar did an interview regarding Douglas throwing him off the balcony. He talked about himself as Devin and Douglas as Troy Martin. Before, when they would do those inside references that 99% of the audience didn't know, the announcers would follow up by not saying anything. Now the announcers acknowledged it by saying he didn't know if Devin was Crowbar's name, or the name of his friend. Crowbar's original name in WCW was Devin Storm, of course. They did a Lava Lamp segment, a Piper's Pit remake, although it came closer to being a barber shop segment or a flower shop, 2 terrible remakes of Piper's Pit, with Mike Awesome, who is this great worker, put in a straitjacket with these terrible gimmicks. The plan is to continue the Lava Lamp segments rather than cut losses. Awesome was trying to pick up on Paul Shock. Jarrett threatened Paul Shock with a guitar shot, but Mean Gene made the save. So Jarrett instead hit Awesome, who took a bump backwards and ended up cutting up his hand, which bled a lot on something behind the set. Douglas beat Crowbar when Wilson interfered. After the match, Medusa attacked Wilson and kicked the hell out of her on the first kick to the stomach, knocking the wind out of her legit. The show highlight was Hart's interview complaining about everything. It seemed half the fans were cheering him until he directed his complaints about Goldberg. He talked about having 10% brain damage, which is real, and there is a valid argument that by saying it on a wrestling show as part of an angle, it trivializes that reality into just being blurred as part of another work-shoot angle that allows people not to believe it, him not being able to buy a ranch because his pay was cut in half, which is probably also real. He got off a bunch of lines that popped the wrestlers. He got bleeped for saying such cuss words as Diana Myers, who has heat with the wrestlers since she's the messenger who makes the phone calls informing them that their pay is being cut in half because they aren't wrestling. Claiming she put a slug in the back of his head, and chimpanzee, I don't know why that is a cuss word on Thunder except maybe they're an endangered species or something, and mention how now Awesome, whose hand was injured doing an ill-conceived out-of-the-ring stunt a few minutes earlier, is only worth half of what he was a few minutes earlier. Goldberg came out and did a face promo and he was great. Goldberg was going to leave without attacking Hart, saying how he felt bad it was he who gave Hart the injury, but Hart insulted him and Goldberg snatched him. Steiner came from behind and hit Goldberg with a pipe and put him in the recliner while Hart taunted him and Goldberg passed out. It was a hell of an effective heat angle. A large degree of its effectiveness was ruined before the show went off the air. Steiner left with a new mystery woman, which is just what WCW needs, is to continually fire male wrestlers and replace them with women that they'll put in the ring with almost no training. Mysterio Jr. and Guerrera beat Harris Twins in about as entertaining a match as you could have given the size mismatch and the Harris Twins just being part of it. Chronic interfered and threw Mysterio Jr. on Ron for the pin. Sting pinned Vampiro with ICP doing the announcing. ICP was really funny early on, but it got old about halfway into the match. After the match, Muta came out and went to blow the mist at Sting, but instead hit Violent J. Goldberg came out, not selling anything whatsoever from the beating 30 minutes earlier, and challenged Hart. Instead, Storm and Skipper came out for a handicap match and Goldberg vaporized them in 96 seconds. The only real negative, and it's a big one, is after doing such a great job getting heat on Goldberg, particularly Hart screaming at him while Steiner had him in the recliner, they blew all the heat off by having Goldberg return later in the show and not selling anything about the attack. There was actually serious discussion the afternoon of the show to cancel the show due to lack of ticket sales and the small crowd. I'm not sure why they would do this, because even though it wasn't likely they had a gigantic throng, they've had numerous Thunder tapings of late that have drawn smaller crowds with no thoughts of cancellation. When the discussions were going on, the idea was to replace the taping with another best of type of show. While it would have saved some money, the fact is the crew was already there, the production and stuff had already been set up. Forgetting the irony of this being an overall entertaining show, which is not exactly a regular occurrence, an unannounced taped show at this point in time would have done a poor number. Unless it would have been 2 hours of nothing but build for Flair coming back, which I doubt was the idea, it would have been very negative for the fans, not to mention no matter what the taped show idea would have been, a cancellation after all the wrestlers were already there would have been devastating to morale of the wrestlers when uncertainty reigns. Add Hart to the list of those fined for arriving late. This happening on September 5th Thunder. There is believed to be an employee hiring freeze. Tickets were put on sale on September 8th for the October 2nd Nitro at the Cow Palace in San Francisco. It should be noted that WWF runs a house show in San Jose 5 days later and they are the same basic media market. There was a decent amount of praise, far from a consensus but more than usual, for September 4th Nitro and pretty much a consensus that September 6th Thunder was a very good show, combined with the misleading application of the past 2 weeks' Nitro ratings, led to a lot of its turned around statements. The reality of when it's turned around will be told quickly, by people buying tickets as they will as soon as the product is hot. Very small TV ratings increases followed by very small decreases that don't result in an upswing of interest in people buying tickets are false illusions as to whether a product is hot or not. Anyway, the reality is, like with Nassau's sales, they sold 1,200 tickets the first day and that's where the company is at this week. The deal with Hayabusa and Nitro is that he was coming in for FMW to shoot an angle with Great Muta, apparently trying to build up a singles match between the two. He was scheduled to fly into Charlotte on September 11th, but Muta gave him the word that he wasn't going to be written into the Nitro show, perhaps because of Vampiro being off the shows for a while, and the two actually met and got the photo shot at Muta's Atlanta apartment. Vampiro is off all the shows temporarily as his wife is going through a tough pregnancy and could give birth at any time over the next 5 weeks. He will work the pay-per-view on September 17th. This eliminates ICP from the shows and takes Muta's angle away since the idea was to build for them at least teasing a split-up before the pay-per-view to set up the three-way. Shawn Michaels' protégés worked the worldwide tapings, in particular Ruben Cruz, whose match with Crowbar got a really strong crowd reaction, Jeremy Sage, Michael Shane, said to be the best of the bunch, Rob Diggs and Chris Kruger. Reports were that nobody looked bad but nobody blew anyone away either. The live crowd accepted them, and often live crowds aren't very receptive to wrestlers who they've never seen. Besides Awesome's hand and Wilson being shaken up, Daphne also has injured ribs and Russo, who suffered a concussion a few months back and has had migraines ever since, which may explain why he wore that helmet in War Games just in case he got hit rather than just to get heat playing the pussy role, got his brain jarred again when Cat potatoed him with a kick on Nitro. Even though Russo usually doesn't go to Thunder, he was originally planning on going, but didn't because he wasn't feeling well. As mentioned on TV, Scott Hudson missed Nitro because his wife gave birth to their first child, a girl named Darby Renee Hudson late September 4th, and he was also given September 11th off. Since people from time to time ask about Dustin Runnels, he is still under contract and there is no explanation as to why he's not around. Russo wanted to bring him in with a gimmick similar to Goldust, and he's been waiting for a start date. They did a tryout match at Thunder with Medusa working with Wilson, which took place while some pre-tapes were airing. Obviously it was not good. Mark Madden was upset at reports he talked too much on Nitro, claiming it was because Jeremy Borash, put on TV for the full 2 hours with little notice, due to Hudson being gone although Borash was scheduled to do one match on the show as something of a tryout, appeared intimidated and didn't say much. The two tried to work an angle out of disliking each other on the air on September 11th. There is some internal divisiveness right now as it pertains to thoughts on Russo versus Ace. A lot of the better in-ring workers are pushing for Ace to be put in charge since they figure his product would take advantage of in-ring wrestlers' strengths, while others, mainly those getting their first career pushes or best pushes in several booking regimes, are solidly behind Russo. There was some backstage unhappiness on Thunder regarding the promo Douglas did. Apparently Douglas was only supposed to talk about his program with Kidman and Crowbar, and not bring up Goldberg, but he ended up doing most of his interview trying to act like he stood toe-to-toe with Goldberg, with the feeling his was shooting his own angle to get linked with Goldberg and not promoting the angles he had set up for him. It was actually pretty clever for him except the announcers pointing out that he was delusional when talking about Goldberg, which took some of the edge off his cleverness. It is clear right now that the number one priority for the company right now isn't trying to build to draw money or even the TV ratings as much as budget cutting. For example, there is not as much of a problem with having the high-priced talent sit at home and continue to get paid because the company feels, because of how their contracts are structured, that by not using them, the company saves money since the guys sitting home like Luger, Page and Hall by contract have to be flown first class and have their hotels paid for, and they can be replaced by talent that can be brought on the road at less company expense. In Hart's Calgary Sun column, he mentioned that he was disappointed with his interview on Thunder and didn't like letting things that have real ramifications to be minimized into a phony storyline. He said the feedback he got was largely that his interview was great, and mentioned how people told him what a great actor he was because of how he put the realistic concussion symptoms into his interview, like stammering, losing his train of thought. He basically said what was sad is that he wasn't acting, and said when the interview was over he had a headache from hell, blurred vision and balance problems, and that he's a long way from being able to take bumps. He pretty well ripped into Bob Ryder, without mentioning him by name, for saying he should quit complaining and be happy he's getting half pay since he's not wrestling. Everyone knows my thoughts on the half pay while injured situation, because it leads to guys coming back before they are healed, and we have examples of that seemingly every week in WCW. While some wrestlers, mainly those past their prime, may and have taken advantage of being paid while hurt, which is an improvement over the old days of wrestling where in many cases when you were injured, you either got very little money, or sometimes no money at all. It's still light years behind other sports which don't exactly cut people's pay in half when they're on the DL. The vast majority of wrestlers, left to their own devices, because they enjoy performing and want to improve and get over, will come back too soon even without the added economic incentive. Even guys in WCW who hated going to work, Eddie Guerrero comes to mind as he spoke about it on the Observer show because of all the internal headaches, still came back from their injuries too soon in hindsight, and Guerrero didn't have the economic necessity to do so at the time, because he didn't want to feel he wasn't earning his money. Having said all that, my opinion when it comes to this situation is that the half-pay deal isn't right, and when I've talked with people in real sports about this, they actually think I'm making it up because the idea of it would be so preposterous in the real world, but wrestlers have never unionized and had collective bargaining, and no matter how huge wrestling is, until that happens, they won't be treated as well, and their injuries taken as seriously as a baseball team or a football team would. The other end is that some wrestlers are cons and the con mentality was bred into the profession big time in the old school way of thinking. We've seen examples of guys with career-ending injuries who suddenly return years later after getting huge insurance checks in the interim. But that exists in other sports as well, and the greater good for the wrestlers would still be if there wasn't a strong economic pressure to go along with the mental pressure most wrestlers are naturally going to put themselves in, to return too quickly from a serious injury. And of course there is the difference, like in football or basketball, between, as John Madden puts them, hurts and injuries. It's a physical business, and in doing it, one has to accept being hurt all the time as part of the profession. You do have to play with pain if you're going to survive this business, because pain is part and parcel of it. But after real surgery, or a real serious injury, when the doctor says you need 6 months off, that's totally different from the chronic stiff lower back from taking bumps, and coming back in 3 because of the feeling one needs to provide for their family in the long run breeds problems, such as an increase in the problems with prescription painkillers, not to mention recurrence of that injury that was just fixed, that this industry doesn't need more of. That said, in the specific case of Bret Hart, there is a contract argument, even though because these two issues are completely different. These may not be totally fair points to compare. He did willingly sign that point in his contract, and the company is losing lots of money and looking to cut back wherever possible. Of course, that also means if you defend the company on the point that every wrestler who has gotten their pay cut signed that point in their contract, you have to defend Hogan, because everything he did for the sake of his career and not in the company's best interest was within his contractual rights, and WCW willingly signed the contract. If you agree with that point, then you can't knock hard on the contract argument, because he did sign a contract that called for half pay if he was incapacitated, even if it was an injury suffered in their rings, and even if one agrees the system itself is wrong, if one believes in honoring contracts, or that WCW is implementing it as a means to save money at this point, then they have a valid point. Since I defended Hart when WWF breached his contract, the only thing I can say is I don't agree with the provision in anyone's contract, but it was in there, and both sides in every case signed it. It's something that should be changed, but no company is going to change it without wrestlers sticking together, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. I've heard people defend the system, citing Hart's case, because in specific, he's still making 7 figures this year, so he in specific is actually the single worst example to cite in this case, but by being the biggest name, is the most highly publicized, and the only star big enough to complain about it publicly, and even he is taking a lot of heat for doing so. Whereas others who would privately complain about the system couldn't do so publicly for fear of the repercussions, and thus because of the amount of money Hart earns, allows people to defend the system. He's making enough money that he in particular is not the one to economically feel sorry for, although if one doesn't have empathy for someone like them or their character or not, who has suffered legitimate brain damage in the ring, and don't even get me started on people who do vignettes mocking the problem, then they've got their own problems with a different form of blurred reality. But there are only a handful of men in Hart's salary category, and 95% of those that this affects run into economic trouble real fast if their pay is cut in half. Regarding Hart's contract, it expires on November 30th, but there is a 2-year option term after that point. Schedule for November and December. There is nothing on the November schedule except for the England tour, Nitro/Thunder tapings, and the pay-per-view. November 6th will be a dual taping in Chicago at United Center. The November 13th Nitro will be taped on November 10th in London, England. The November 15th Thunder will be taped on November 12th in Manchester, England. There will be a Germany-only pay-per-view live on November 16th in Oberhausen. There will also be dual tapings on November 20th in Augusta, Georgia. This show was originally scheduled for Atlanta at the Phillips Arena but was moved out of the home base most likely because they didn't want so much of the main brass and the Turner employees that attend when WCW runs Nitro in Atlanta to see what undoubtedly would be a heavily papered and still relatively empty building. The pay-per-view will take place on November 26th at the U.S. Cellular Arena in Milwaukee while the November 27th Nitro/Thunder taping is in Green Bay. They are doing 5 house shows in December, in Kearney, Nebraska, Monroe, Louisiana, Baton Rouge, Lake Charles, and Beaumont. Starrcade will be December 17th at the MCI Center in Washington, D.C. The dual tapings are December 4th in Lincoln, Nebraska, December 11th in Bossier City, L.A., December 18th in Richmond, California, and to avoid running on Christmas night, although there will be a Nitro that night, both Nitro for that night and Thunder for December 27th will be taped on December 22nd in Memphis. October 11th scheduled show in Perth, Australia was cancelled. Thunder tapings on September 5th in College Station, Texas, campus of Texas on, drew 3,168 fans, which was 1,745 paying $37,630. Nitro on September 11th in Charlotte drew 3,436 fans, which was 1,657 paying $35,460. That's with the return of Rick. Before the word got out that Rick was going to be appearing on the show, they had sold about 700 tickets. WWF. Besides Rock vs. Kane vs. Undertaker vs. Benoit as the main event and Triple H vs. Angle with Foley as ref, at one point the role for Austin on the show was considered as being a ref in this match, but obviously they changed it to instead have Austin looking for who drove the car. Also on the September 24th pay-per-view are scheduled to be Edge and Christian vs. Hardys in a cage match for the tag titles, X-Pac vs. Jericho, presumably based on TV as nobody has officially said anything about it, and Lawler vs. Taz in a strap match. Preliminary estimates for SummerSlam are that it will end up doing 560,000 buys, which is roughly a 1.40 buy rate and $7.21 million as WWFE's share. It's interesting that SummerSlam, traditionally the number 2 show of the year behind Mania, will at best finish number 4 as Mania, Royal Rumble and Backlash were all considerably ahead. The first of 2 nights in Phoenix for Raw on September 11th opened with the conference with Foley, Rock, Benoit, Kane, and Undertaker. Foley asked for whomever ran over Austin to come forward before Austin shows up on the pay-per-view. Rock came out, but said he wasn't the guy. They both put Austin over like crazy until the other guys came out and they set up the main event. Hardys beat Dudleys in a very good match that was way too short when they had the Akri, Edge and Christian run-in, with Edge hitting Matt with the belt, but he fell backwards off the ropes on Bubba for the pin. After the match they laid out Edge and Christian including a 3D on Edge on a table that didn't break. Lita beat Ivory in a women's match that wasn't half bad. Eddie, who was the star of the show, and Chyna at first made up for a bout with Too Cool, who the deal was they were friends and would all dance together. Too Cool won the match pinning Guerrero. They all started dancing, but Guerrero laid both out with belt shots. Rikishi came out and destroyed Guerrero and was about to give him the stink face when Chyna hit Rikishi with the belt. GMS juiced pretty heavy from his belt shot. Chyna told Guerrero she was posing nude in Playboy, which is out September 25th. Guerrero did another great acting job threatening to beat up Hugh Hefner. It was great promotion for the mag shot. Jericho beat Triple H via DQ in a good match that lacked some crowd heat because Triple H is a face and worked as a face. X-Pac interfered for the DQ, and Triple H shoved down X-Pac for costing him the match. Before this happened, Stephanie came out and Angle dragged her to the back. RTC beat Acolytes. Venus came out to make the save and, shock of shocks, laid out both Acolytes with wicked chair shots. Snow beat Taz in a quickie when Lawler hit Snow with a photo of David Hasselhoff. Snow came out in this German garb since he's European champ, and had the photo since Hasselhoff is such a big singing star in Germany. Taz did an interview saying that WWF Politics beat him and he's tapping out to the politics. Tanda beat Angle in a handicap bout via DQ when Triple H attacked them, costing Angle the bout. Test was about to hit Stephanie. Tanda beat up on Triple H and Angle saved Triple H. It turned into a 3-ring circus at this point with Triple H shoving down Stephanie, Stephanie knocking down a ref, Stephanie stopping Triple H from giving Angel a pedigree, Triple H punching Stephanie, Angle taking a bump knocking Stephanie off the apron. Triple H carried Stephanie off and Angle punched him and he dropped Stephanie. This for some reason was so hilarious. Blackman beat X-Pac when Jericho laid out X with a kendo stick on the ramp in a good match. Kane and Benoit beat Rock and Undertaker in 5 minutes when Benoit pinned Undertaker, although Kane did the damage with a clothesline as the setup for the jackknife cradle. Match had a lot of heat and was very good. A fan tried to hit the ring, which clearly wasn't a plant because they got the cameras away. Regal was scheduled to debut on the show, but it was postponed until SmackDown because they ran short on time. At this point it is official that Austin's return to television live will be on September 25th from State College, Pennsylvania, which is scheduled as the first Raw on TNN. Austin, 35, and Deborah Marshall, 40, are scheduled to get married imminently, as in perhaps before you read this. Jerry Lawler, 50, and Stacey Carter, 30, Kat, are also scheduled to get married this month. Some notes from the September 7th SmackDown TV show. X-Pac vs. Jericho was a good match. The finish was not only strange given who went over considering the respective main event potential of each wrestler, but how clean the heel went over. They often do that as a prelude to a turn. The guy turning loses consistently with the idea that once they turn, they're short of a fresh character. Edge and Christian and Rock had a really fun interview segment. Edge and Christian sometimes get a little too Wayne's Worldish and were in spots, but Rock has so much confidence out there that just cracking a smile can make an entire segment. Benoit Rikishi finish was kind of weak. Noticed OVW wrestler Trailer Park Trash as one of the guys on the bar, and in fact, the guy who got popped. Later in the show they blew off the feud by having all 4 guys in the bar drunk making fun of each other with black eyes and blood flowing. Guerrero put on a tremendous performance playing the asshole boyfriend, but Chyna's acting was pretty bad. Undertaker probably had the best in-ring performance he's had since coming back in a good match with Angle, as he took some moves and actually flew around the ring a lot. It was hard to understand that Undertaker had Angle set up for his last ride when Benoit saved. Then Undertaker held his own against both Benoit and Angle, so when Triple H came out, it didn't even look like a save as Undertaker wasn't selling to build heat. I guess that makes sense since they didn't want to make it look like Triple H was saving Undertaker, just that he was after Angle. However, after all that, there was no need for Undertaker to plant Benoit with the last ride, as since he already had Angle beat and didn't sell for the 2 top heels in the company, he and Benoit could have gone toe-to-toe even since both are in the pay-per-view main event. Ventura agreed to moderate the proposed presidential debate on SmackDown if the candidates themselves agreed, and also requested that WWF invite third-party candidates to participate. Variety reported that Dwayne Johnson pulled out of a starring role in an untitled sci-fi action film for Revolution Studios which would have paid him $5 million. Ross and a different wrestler will appear all week on Regis from October 23rd to October 27th to promote Ross' new cookbook that comes out that week in conjunction to the long-promoted release of his barbecue sauce. Davey Boy Smith will be cleared to return next week after his shoulder surgery, but that doesn't mean he'll be brought back full-time. Road Dogg will be out until this coming weekend due to his wife being ill. Reckless Youth's developmental deal with WWF runs out this month and he won't be resigned. They'll return to the Northeast from Memphis on September 17th and begin taking indie bookings from that point. Dwayne Johnson's latest success is that the song It Doesn't Matter, performed by himself and Wyclef Jean, debuted at number 3 on the UK pop charts. The last time a wrestling single was that high on the charts in the UK was in 1992 when WWF Slam Jam also hit number 3. Kid Rock's American Badass opened at number 25, but fell to number 38 in its second week. Former WWF steroid program administrator Dr. Mauro Di Pasquale was in the news this past week backing up the appeal by Canadian Robin Lyons to be reinstated on the Olympic team after testing positive for anabolic steroid norandrosterone. Lyons lost her appeal. In a story in the Edmonton Sun, Di Pasquale, who at a WWF-sponsored symposium on drug use in sports in 1992 claimed to have developed a testing procedure that was foolproof, including for growth hormone, which to this day some 8 years later there are still no accepted tests for, now said that the sports community should drop drug testing. The International Olympic Committee saying we're catching all the drug-taking athletes is ludicrous. Under proper medical supervision, athletes would not be taking as much of these drugs as they do. At the lower level of competition, testing is useful because the athlete is not knowledgeable about taking substances. But as an athlete advances in sophistication and financial security, they become more able to best the tests. Di Pasquale testified for Lyons saying there are several ways the steroids found in Lyons' urine could have been naturally manufactured by her body. DePasquale testified back in 1988 that Ben Johnson was probably clean at the time he set the world record in the 100. On the Ross Report, Jim Ross said that Big Show is back in OVW after being out a few weeks with a back injury and would be there for several, said to be 3 minimum, months. He praised Mark Henry for cutting down from 410 to 350 and said Henry could be brought back by the end of the year. Michaels, 35, is saying he's up to 215 pounds with 12% body fat. I know that doesn't sound impressive with all the fake 4% talk you hear, but anything under 15% is pretty good condition, and has been training hard for 2 months. According to friends of his, he's itching to get back in the thick of things. Whether he'll wrestle one last match or not still is uncertain. Both Playboy and Forbes are working on McMahon WWFE stories. In the UK, the ratings for Heat are going down because the show hasn't been given a regular time slot for months. It's on at a different time nearly every week. Apparently only 2 executives at Channel 4 had screened the programming before they bought the rights to it. They thought they were buying a show to hit the 10 to 16 age demo, and then were surprised at the content. Basically, the company didn't know what they were buying, which is why they now insist on the 1-hour tape delay because they own the rights to show several of the pay-per-view shows. Because the pay-per-view shows air at 1 a.m. and are still edited, when Channel 4 officials were asked why, they responded because a lot of children may be videotaping it. Now in its own way, that's funny, even more so because the station itself has a rep for providing edgy programming. Just to show how balanced, so to speak, the major revenue streams are in almost equal in importance. Over the last fiscal year, the WWF grossed about $88 million on live events, between Livegate and merchandise sold at the venues, $90 million from pay-per-view events, $94 million from licensing, which includes internet, magazine, books, home videos as well as toys and licensed products, and outside merchandise sales, and $89 million from television program sales and ad revenue. SmackDown taping September 5th at Freedom Hall in Louisville drew 11,111, that's a real number, believe it or not, about 1,800 shy of capacity for the SmackDown setup, paying $344,045. House show on September 9th in Seattle drew a sellout 13,786 paying $450,501. They did split crews on September 10th, with half the crew working Denver, which drew a sellout 10,311 paying $352,490, and the other half working in Reno, which drew 8,389 paying $266,891. Raw in Phoenix drew a sellout 13,355 paying $377,235. We don't have all the merchandise figures for the week, but it worked out to $7.89 per head. The weekend was a pretty big success with the sellouts in Seattle and Denver, since Rock, who had the entire weekend off from house shows, didn't work in either city. Rock has been getting more and more house shows off of late. Angle was also off the weekend, although that wouldn't have been known. He was booked in Seattle and Denver, due to the after effects of what apparently was a concussion suffered at SummerSlam. Road Dogg was not only off the weekend shows, but also missed TV due to an illness to his wife and is expected back this coming weekend. Val Venus and Steven Richards were also pulled from the house shows because their TV angle had Richards kidnapping Venus, and it wouldn't make any sense within the storyline for both to work house shows. Steven Regal made his house show debut on this tenure with WWF by working Midian in Denver, which was a decision made when management felt he looked impressive and in condition doing TV dark matches, and they hurried his road show debut. His debut as a TV character is probably imminent. Seattle was headlined by Undertaker and Rikishi over Benoit and Kane when Kane walked out on Benoit and left him to be pinned in a street fight. After the match ended, Undertaker disappeared, leaving Rikishi and Too Cool to dance. In the other top match, Triple H beat Jericho in a match with 2 ref bumps and X-Pac interfering. Denver had Triple H over Jericho as the main event. Reno was headlined by the same Undertaker and Rikishi over Benoit and Kane match. They did a Lawler vs. Taz match which ended with Taz DQ'd for putting the choke on Kat, who to the best of my knowledge has never been acknowledged in WWF storylines as being linked with Lawler beforehand. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine,